Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland, where we are devoted to conversations of consequence that help democracy thrive. It's Wednesday, July 24th, and I am Josie Jones, the associate producer and director of the community building at Borderlight, and the moderator for today's conversation, which is the third forum in the City Club's free outdoor summer series underneath the chandelier at Playhouse Square. Today, we are surrounded by the Borderlight Annual Theatre Festival, which showcases innovative theater that inspires, builds cross-cultural understanding, and celebrates the diversity of the human experience. It is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 2015 by Dale Heinen and Jeffrey Pence. The festival kicks off today and will run through July 27th, which is Saturday. Part of the lineup includes 4 international shows, 43 Fringe Shows, and 8 workshops across 20 stages in and around the Playhouse Square District. Now, we will hear from featured artists from the festival about the importance of representation and diverse creativity in the arts and culture industry. Joining me on stage is Patterson Joseph, award-winning actor and author of The Secret Diaries of Charles Ignatius Sancho. Thank you for being here.
Thank
Gabriela Munoz, playwright, creator, and director, and notably a performer as Chula the Clown. Thank you for being here. And Kenneth Shirley, he is Dene and a champion men's fancy dancer with Indigenous Enterprise. If you have a question for our speakers, you can text it to 330-541-5794. That's 330-541-5794. And a City Club staff will try to work it into the second half of our program. Members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming our artists and performers. So to kick it off, I'm going to have everyone just tell them a little bit about the piece that you've brought to Borderlight so they have context for us as we start our conversation. You can, whatever order.
Hello, how's everybody doing? Awesome. My name is Kenneth Shirley. Like she was saying, the show I brought is called Indigenous Liberation. I am accompanied by some champion dancers. Can you, right there at that table, actually, I'll raise your hands. Yeah. So from the Red Lake Nation, we have Amaya Little Wolf, and from the Navajo Nation, we have Mr. Dominic Pablo. So we have a champion dancers are going to be bringing some indigenous culture here to Borderlight. And our name of our show is called Indigenous Liberation, and we're going to be performing it tonight at 6 p.m. So if you guys want to come over and see some champion Native American dancers and see some culture, bring some representation here to Cleveland, Ohio, feel free to come on by. Yeah, today at 6 p.m.
Thank you. Gabriela?
Hi, I'm Gabby Munoz. I am from Mexico City, and I'm bringing a show called Perhaps Quizás. This is the second time I'm in Cleveland, but the first time that I'm actually going to be able to perform this show, and I am thrilled. It's a show I created 14 years ago, and since then I've been touring all over because it's a silent show, and it's about, well, the archetype of a bride finding true love. But really, 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 it is about human connections and love in many ways. It's such a broad spectrum. It's such a broad theme. So everyone in the audience can actually have their own love story to relate to. That can be with a partner, with a friend, with a family member, or really self-love. So I'm very happy. I'll be performing tomorrow night. Tomorrow is Thursday. Friday and Saturday at the Helen. So I hope to see you there.
Thank you. And the Helen, not to be confused with the Helen Rehearsal Hall, she will be in the Helen Theater.
Hi, I'm Patterson Joseph, and I come from the United Kingdom, the country that used to own you. Thankfully, no longer. But I'm bringing a show based on a novel that I have written, and the person that I got obsessed with way back in 1999. His name is Charles Ignatius Sancho, And he was the first person that we know of African descent to vote in a British parliamentary election. Dry as dust, isn't it? Sounds so boring. Even I'm bored by that. But the great thing was he was also an actor. He was a musician, a composer of great music in the 1700s. And I discovered him in my mid-30s, having been born and raised in the United Kingdom and not knowing anything about any Black people before my parents' generation came in the 40s and 50s. So it's been a journey of discovery of my own African British history. And the show has now evolved into a thing I call Sancho and Me for One Night Only, where his music is featured. I have my musician composer Ben Park on stage with me. I read from the novel, and then you, the audience who come, will pick bits out of the novel, and I'll start reading that, and we'll see where we go. So that's why it's called For One Night Only, because each night is unique.
Thank you. That was great. That was wonderful. And I know as performers and as characters, there's a little bit of yourselves in each one of your pieces. Can you talk a little bit about how your character or your performance is you and is not you, and how it gives you the opportunity to maybe say something you might not normally say or do as an individual?
Go, Gabby.
So in my case, the character I created, I was just telling you about it. Oh, thank you. This is better.
Yeah.
Okay. We were actually just talking about this. Oh, maybe it's not better.
Is mine better?
We're having a slight technical
How about that?
difficulty.
Yeah. Hello? Okay.
Try this.
We're playing musical mics.
Okay. Yeah, this is it. So we were just talking about that. In my case, the character came sort of in dreams as I was going through a personal experience and a separation with a partner. And at the same time, I was reading Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. And I was fascinated by the character of Miss Havisham and how she became completely obsessed and crazy to finding that one person. And that I started experimenting or exploring it through imagery and visuals. So I started a photographic inquiry rather than a theatrical process. And then when I saw the pictures, I thought, well, this character is already alive. So I might as well just start seeing how she interacts with other people. And of course, it is my alter ego. Of course, it is me. As I said before, I've been doing the show for 14 years, but it's not the same. It's not the same character because it's so attached to me, and I know perfectly how to play her or play off her. But it's an evolution. Of course, I'm not the same woman I was a year before or 14 years ago. So the character also has evolved enormously with me. And I think it's not that it's hidden behind any masks or whatsoever, but I also think the fact of doing it through playing her, through clowning, makes it, there is no social consciousness in her. So I do play differently than how I am in real life, on my day-to-day. But of course, she's me in a very exacerbated way.
Gabby, you said, we were talking earlier, and you said that you don't use any words, which is alien to me because I only use words. How did you find that? How did you find expression without using words?
I really, yeah, that's a good question. And then I get invited to come and talk, which is also really strange. But I do speak. Although in my shows, I always found it very natural. When I started the process of clowning and theater clowning, I never spoke. And in school, I trained in London, actually. And my teachers in London would encourage every student to find their own clowning voice. And with me, they were like, no, that's okay. Like your eyes and your gestures are so expressive that we can actually see the line of thoughts. And it just feels very natural to me to tell the narrative in other ways and to translate imagery into movement rather than words.
Well, thank you for that. I'm going to direct this question at Kenneth, and about connection. Your piece, unlike Patterson and Gabriella's piece, it is with other people on stage with you. Can you talk a little bit about your connection to these individuals?
So the performance that we're going to be doing is like kind of like goes back so long to beyond where colonialism came. So the dances I'm doing actually come from like our ancient elders and stuff from passed down from generation to generation. And me and Dominic Pablo have actually been dancing since we were like children. I learned to dance when I was 2 years old, and he learned to dance as a child. So before we could even speak, so these dances have been passed to us by our elders, and it's kind of like goes beyond like the whole before this country was even invented. So what's kind of like my relation to these wonderful people here is that we're no longer just representing ourselves, but we're representing our people, representing our traditions, representing something that was almost taken away from us. You know, it's something that I don't take for granted here. It wasn't too long ago, like me and Amaya and Dom would have been arrested for what we're doing here today. So to fast forward to 2024, and I'm over here being celebrated by all you wonderful people here in Ohio, means a whole lot to us, means a whole lot to our ancestors, means a whole lot to our people. So we're very excited to be able to bring a little bit of something different to Cleveland and kind of being able to bring that representation and to kind of just like answer your question of just like my relationship to our friends. It's something that we very, very hold deeply to us and our people and our heritage. So, yeah.
I love that. And how long have you been performing?
The show or just dancing?
Dancing.
I've been dancing since I was 2 years old.
That is a
so
really
before I could even talk.
Oh, I love that. And a lot of your work, all of your work seems to be influenced by audience, right? Like performance is always influenced by audience, and somehow it is always going to be different every time because of the people that are there. How's it changed? I know earlier we were talking about your show and how it has been shaped by others. How have your shows changed over time?
I started performing Sancho, and I would say performing Sancho because it was a one-person show and I embodied him for about 75 minutes. He's famously painted by Thomas Gainsborough. He's a great English painter of the 1700s. And that was my first encounter with him. And it was an encounter. I opened a book called Black England by an American author, Gretchen Gerdziner, and I found this black and white print of this extraordinary man who, if you come and see the show, you'll see a blown up portrait of him. And it's a striking image because it's from the era of the height of British slavery. And yet this man looks like a lord. And it seemed, the only word I could think of, incongruous. How could he possibly be this person looking as if he's got all the time in the world, his hands in his waistcoat like a man of leisure. And I became sort of obsessed with figuring out who he really was, because it's clearly a performance. And through that, beginning with a really very theatrical idea of he's being painted in Gainsborough's studio and you're the audience who've come to see him being painted. And then I begin to talk to you about, hey, who do you think I am? And then it evolves into talking about his story. This is the original show that I wrote, has now evolved into, I think, a sort of deeper investigation of myself as a Black Briton. My own ignorance of my own people's history in that country. I knew about the Caribbean and I knew about America and I knew what was happening with captive Africans there, but I had no idea about what was happening on British soil. And it affected me very personally. So the new show, the first show was called Sancho, an Act of Remembrance. It was like, we've forgotten this history, or it's been hidden. Let's tell the story of these forgotten people. Has now evolved into a show that I now call Sancho and Me, for one night only. And the for one night only is the reaction to the audience. Because the audience might ask me questions that I haven't been asked before. They might ask me to read a section of the novel I haven't read before. And Ben Park, who's, raise your hands there, Ben. He's my composer and musician. He's been with me. Nice, yes. Give him some applause, please. He's been with me since 2010, and he'll improvise with me whatever section of the book I'm reading. So it's both an exploration of my own journey of knowledge and a conversation with an audience who happens to be there. And sometimes the audience want to hear politics. Sometimes they want to hear about the music. Sometimes they just want to hear about his domestic life. And then I intersperse that with my life growing up in the 1960s, 70s and 80s in London. So it's personal, and it's become more personal as I've evolved the show.
And Kenneth, for folks who have not experienced powwow and don't know what to expect, how can they interact as a part of your performance?
Well, I'm gonna ask the audience, have any of y'all been to a powwow? You got a few? Okay, all right. Well, for those that haven't been, it's kind of like a traditional Native American social gathering and competition that happens here in the United States and Canada. And so we're going to be bringing a little bit of that energy here to Cleveland. And we're going to be doing like a little bit of showcasing about where the dance comes from and the history behind it. And then towards the end of the show, we want to be able to kind of like, you know, let a little bit of the audience participation up. So we're going to be inviting some of y'all to be joining us in the last song and just kind of like get a little bit of our history and kind of like, you know, we're going to be exercising a little bit together.
It's
so
like, what does interaction mean? Do they need to come dressed comfortably?
Bring some Nike shorts. Bring some Adidas sweats. We're going to get a little bit sweaty.
I love this. And so understanding that a lot of the times, as we are here to talk about representation, a lot of the times when we talk about Black and brown people, we talk about them in a historical sense, or we talk about them in a kind of stereotypical way. And I like that each individual performance that y'all are bringing to the festival brings something that is not a stereotype of people. And one of the things that I think is really interesting about being here at the City Club talking about freedom of speech specifically is like there are states here in the United States that are banning books about the history of this country. And I think that it is important that your performances are not the only ways to learn about the history of this country and of people. Can you talk a little bit more about how you see your work contributing to changing imagery or stereotypes of Black and brown people in performance or just in media in general? It's a big question. It's a giant question.
Well, Britain is largely to blame for American slavery. And it is a surprise to Britons when I tell them that the first time I performed in the United States, Sancho, an act of remembrance back in 2016. I was at the Kennedy Center in Washington. And at the end of the show, we had a talk back. And 4 African-American ladies, they would have been in their 70s, I think, got up and said, you know, son, that bit at the end of the show where Sancho's looking for his papers in order to vote, that's not an old story. That's happening to us today. And I was shocked because I thought I was sort of bringing a museum piece. And it was the first time I realized how relevant that story was globally. The other question I would get when I traveled around America in the talkbacks, and this is from African-American scholars as well, was, did Britain ever have slavery? Now, some people in Britain laugh at that. And I stop them and I say, well, how would they know? We have no Alex Haley's roots. There's no version of British slavery that exists in film form or televisual form. And the closest you get to it is Bridgerton. And my God, doesn't it look great for Black and brown people? So this fiction, on top of the ignorance, because of the propaganda that the British Empire has spread around the world, that they were the ones who stopped slavery first, and which is a lie, and also that they blockaded the other nations and they were the great heroes, is so prevalent that even Britons themselves don't know their own history. So the history is not only hidden, the propaganda has made it completely invisible. And so you can't see, there's no monument to slavery to the enslaved Africans in Britain. Nowhere. Not one. If there's any monuments, it's to a guy called William Wilberforce, who got the act of abolition through Parliament in the 1807. There's not one memorial. And I find that extraordinary. So when we perform, we're bypassing the academic knowledge that is curated and bringing stories and reality and our own bodies, if you like, to tell our ancestral stories. And Kenneth is doing that in an amazingly physical way. I only just saw it on, he just showed me a clip on his phone, and there's just goosebumps, and my whole skin is like, oh, wow, this is something I've never witnessed before. And it's not just a pretty dance. It's got power in it. And that's, I think, the personal. When we bring the personal to these stories, they bypass, anti-critical race theory or, any of that stuff. It gets bypassed by the reality of a human being expressing their ancestral stories. And that's what art does in a way that novels, I suppose, try to do, academic books maybe attempt to do, but only physical performance can really do.
Kenneth, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just kind of like going off what this kind gentleman said is like, it's just powerful. When I was growing up, I went from being on the reservation and just being surrounded by my community. And then I went to Phoenix, Arizona, where I was like the only Native American kid in the classroom. And I just felt underrepresented. I felt like kind of isolated, and my culture was kind of like not in the city. And then it kind of really, really made me feel a little bit isolated, where my identity was like kind of missing. But then my Native American dance, when I would do that, I got connected instantly to my roots, my heritage. I could just feel my ancestors like kind of watching me over my shoulder. And then it just made me feel being proud to be Native American. And then as I got older, that dance has taken me to, this man's homeland. It took me to London. It took me to the Super Bowl. It took me to the Sydney Opera House. And now it's taking me to Cleveland, Ohio. and I think that it's just the power of dance and the representation that it brings. Like with our show, you'll kind of see that it just brings an emotion that transcends race, it transcends politics, it transcends economic value. It just something, when you see it, you're like, okay, that is the true inhabitants of what America is. It kind of just goes way past and makes you feel something in your soul, like, oh, that is the true land, that what we're standing on is what we're doing. So that's kind of like the power of it.
Yeah, I love that. And
I would also like
please,
to add on that. I think in my case, it's also about gender. Since I've heard so many times, it is also about ethnicity, of course, but the representation of also being a woman in a field that is mainly done by men. And comedy and humor and clowning was also always like for men. And I remember many people in my journey who told me I could not do this because I was a woman and women were the muse, which whatever that meant. I was like, yeah, all right, whatever. Luckily, that didn't stick with me at all. I didn't understand what that was. I came from a household where I was encouraged and nourished to go into my imagination and play and be light with whatever topics I wanted to talk, and encouraged to always talk about the things that mattered to me. So in that sense, I was lucky to continue that. But of course, it's been a struggle sometimes to defend my place in a very male-dominant field, and to just continue and push through and focus on what it is that I am doing. And hopefully I am also opening the doors for other generations to step, and other women in Mexico and in the world, really, to say, I can also be funny, I can have a good laugh, and I can share it with the world, and I don't need to copy a male model of anything. I have my own stories to tell.
And you don't have to match what the imagery is currently of what people see people who look like you doing. They can laugh, they can cry, they can talk about love and connect to each other in a different way.
Absolutely.
I love that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Can I just talk
yeah, you can
about
have.
a little bit about who gets to tell whose story? Like when we think about this, and it's quite shocking that most books are written by men. I'm talking about for these thousands of years that we've been writing books, and they've been written by middle class and upper class men, and the majority have been written by European men. Those that we get in the West, or we have got traditionally in the West. I'm talking about Arabic writers or Indian writers or African writers. I'm talking about the basic European canon of literature that we all are very familiar with. And when you think about that, it's such a bizarre thing to ask ourselves, who's told our stories for thousands of years? It's been one particular kind of demographic. So now there's a burgeoning of other voices, and those voices are getting shut down. Of course, you're talking about books being banned. I mean, they're books that are talking about other communities that are not white, male, middle class, upper class Europeans. They're women's stories, they're third gender stories, they are stories of global majority people. And I think it's the most exciting time to be telling stories, to be writing. And often what's happening, especially in British universities, is that children are being told not to go into the humanities. Don't write history. You won't make any money. You won't be able to pay back your student loan. Don't write about theatre, or don't do the arts because you can't make any money out of it, silencing those voices. But actually, I'd say we're hungry for other voices. I've seen it in the audiences. You've seen it in the audiences that you've been with. And there's a whole career to be made there. So I would encourage young people to delve into history, to write history, and to perform.
Yeah. And this goes really well into my last question. It feels
We rehearsed that.
we-
That was the only bit we rehearsed, the smooth transition.
It feels like because we are in an era where we are now talking more and more about Black and brown people, that there is a monetization of diversity that is happening in a way that can feel a little dirty for people. It makes them feel like a commodity. What do you say to people that are wanting to tell their stories, but are also kind of feeling that level of, I don't want to be monetized? What do you tell them about telling their own stories or representing their own culture? Another light question.
I mean, I'll just say very briefly, why can't we have both? Why can't we do that work and be paid for it? That doesn't seem to be too contradictory. As long as we're in control of the work ourselves, we're getting paid for it, we're doing the work, why not be paid for it?
But do you mean like checking a box? Also,
Yeah,
like,
essentially,
okay, so,
like, you're here because we need a brown person to represent this
yeah,
section
that is
of
a
people.
topic. Yeah. And I've had this conversation also with friends that also feel uncomfortable with having to mention every time they sell their show, they need to mention it's an African American show cast, or it's a Hispanic cast, or it's a queer, and it's like, do we need to do that? That it also, I'm not sure what the answer is.
I don't think there is an easy answer.
No,
but if
there
a young
isn't.
person is saying, I want to make a story and I want to tell my own story, whether it be about my people, whether it be I wanted to get into clowning, what do you say to people that are going to be faced with that feeling? How have you dealt with that feeling for yourself? Because it's come up.
I've definitely turned down like opportunities where they were trying to use Native Americans as a platform for their benefit. Like I've just kind of like had my morals of just like, okay, I know I'm not just representing Indigenous enterprise. Like all Native American people are going to see this, whether they are part of my company or not. So I kind of just always like hold values over money to just kind of just like, just because you're going to get a bag out of this does not mean that you're going to get represented and you're going to get dragged through the mud of like, I've seen, like Dior, for example, they had like a whole campaign for their cologne called Sauvage, and they had a Native American dancing in that commercial. Yes, the dancer got paid very well, but you know, they're essentially calling Native American savages in that commercial, and it did not go well, and they got dragged through the mud, and Dior had to pull the campaign, and they had to like basically cancel the whole entire thing because they used a Native American as like this little token piece for a cologne called Sauvage, and it was with Johnny Depp, and he was like playing a guitar. So that's just kind of like an example of like every opportunity is not always for you. Just because you're getting paid for it, does that mean you have to go out there and kind of represent our whole people and make us all look like a tokenized item? If that makes any sense.
No, that does. I think what I hear is checking in with yourself. Like it is not necessarily that this is that you shouldn't be telling your story, because you should be paid for your story and you should be telling your story, but then also listen to that inner voice that says, this doesn't necessarily feel good. And is this serving other people who I am trying to bridge this gap with? So yeah, I appreciate that.
The wonderful thing would be not to have to think about that, to just be an artist and just express yourself. But you you live in the real world. And I started acting professionally way back in 1988, and I did a lot of theater initially, and then some TV. And my one mantra was always, whatever you do, don't put down Black people in what you're doing. Or don't allow yourself to be in a role where you're the only representative of Black people, whether the role is about you being Black or not, but you will represent Black people. Don't be the one who people can go, oh yeah, he's the criminal, with absolutely no redeeming qualities or with no story behind it. You're just there to represent the criminal element of Black communities. And that for me was always my protection. I'd always look at those roles and scripts, because actors have very little power. Of course, you take the job or don't take the job, but I'd always look at that and go, how will I be seen? Not personally, how does Patterson Joseph get seen, but how would this character be seen? And if the context is, well, there is a Black hero here and there's a Black heroine there, and you're playing a character who's villainous, that's okay. We've got balance here, and the character's well written. I turned down this job. It was it was an audition for a sort of shoot 'em up movie, and it was a character that was a Rastafarian, and I wasn't a Rastafarian. Never been able to grow my hair that long, and so they wanted to put a wig on each of the actors who went in. It was like the second or third audition I'd ever been for. It was a Claude Van Damme film, and one of the bits of the script was, Rastafarian pulls up to a schoolyard. Lovely little blonde-haired kid of 12 years old comes to the car and asks the guy for drugs, and he gives him some drugs. And I first of all, I was like reading this, because you're only reading it in the room, you don't get a chance to. I'm thinking, this is terrible. And when I walked into the room, they asked me to put the wig on, and I went, no, I'm not a Rastafarian. I'm just going to play it like this. And of course, all the other actors who went in did this thing, even though they'd all complained. And it was so early on in my career that I went, I'm never going to be that guy. Yeah. I'm never going to be the one representing the most negative aspect of my ethnicity. Even though my ethnicity is not the whole of me, I am representing because I'm here. Yeah. And that's the world we live in. So I would say have integrity, but get paid when you can for doing your own work.
And the hope, I think, is to not have to, at some point, right, we'll get to a place where we won't have to do the emotional labor of having to think through these things over and over. I do want to make sure that there is room for questions from the audience. I have a little script I'm going to read before we get to that section. We are about to begin the Q&A. For our live stream audience at cityclub.org or those just joining, I am Josie Jones, Associate Producer and Director of Community Building at Borderlight, and the moderator for today's conversation. We welcome we welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, as well as our live stream audience. If you'd like to text a question for our speakers, please text it to 330-541-5794. That's 330-541-5794. And the City Club staff will try to work it into the program. We have a question. One second, we're having technical difficulties.
Yep.
Perfect.
Hello, welcome to Cleveland.
Thank you.
Here in Cleveland, we're pretty proud of our arts community, and I'm wondering whether you have had much of a chance to see our city, what you think of it, and whether you've had an opportunity or have been asked to do a similar type of presentation in other cities. Thank you.
What a kind question. Thank you.
I love it. It's I'm from Phoenix, so it's like 118 degrees where I'm from. So this weather is amazing. Yeah, it's absolutely. I haven't had a chance to see much of the city. I just got in last night. So I'm looking forward to exploring it this week. I was planning on hitting up Cedar Point at some point. Y'all know the vibes of Cedar Point.
Be sure to give him some suggestions, y'all.
But yeah, I'm excited. I've done the show in many places all around the world, so we're very excited to be able to bring it for the first time in Cleveland. It's my first time ever in my life being in Cleveland, so very happy to be here.
I'm also very happy to be here. I haven't been able also to see as much as I want, but thanks to the wonderful Shar, I've been able to see a little bit. And what I've seen so far, I've loved. So I can't wait to start the shows and feel the audiences. And that will also give me a very good idea of where I am.
Hi, this is my second time in Cleveland. The first time was a year ago last April, where I came to talk at the City Club. So I had a moment where I thought, God, I'm so old, I can't even remember what happened last April because I don't remember any of this. What is this building? And thankfully, thankfully, Cynthia Connolly reminded me that this is a new building. So I had a great welcome last time, and I'm expecting the same. I already have had a great welcome this time. We haven't seen much, have we, Ben? We've been going to and fro from the theatre there. What's that? We're working. Yeah, we're working. No, we saw the baseball going on, and everybody seemed to be leaving way before the match was finished, which shows a distinct lack of commitment and loyalty, I must say. So that wasn't so good.
We have a complicated history with our sports teams.
I could feel that. I could feel that as they rushed out of the stadium. But yeah, I've been running around here a little bit. I sort of walk run. I ran around the stadium, a lot of work going on. So I'm looking forward to seeing a bit more on our days off tomorrow and Friday.
We have another question.
Yes, this is a text question. I hear a lot about power. Can you talk about what it means to reclaim that power through your art? And what do you hope your audiences take away from your performances?
A lot of big questions today.
Go, Kenneth.
For me, for dancing, it always makes me feel like in touch with my ancestors and kind of makes me feel my culture represented. And it just makes me feel, I don't take it for granted. Like I said, it was like illegal to do what we were doing. So I always keep that in mind of just like being very, very thankful to do what we're doing. Like we're the only art form that I would have been put into handcuffs like 100 years ago. So it just makes me feel celebrated. It makes me feel I'm doing something that is at one point, was almost excluded and taken away entirely from my people. So I just really, really, I'm very, very proud of it. And it just makes me feel super happy, and it's taking me all over the world. So, yeah.
In my case, I think it's regaining power through humor and sharing that with the rest of the audience and sharing that with the rest of the people on how to really switch from some events that could be painful or grief into something that's lighter and not to take each other so seriously so we can play. And that is really powerful to me, to celebrate who we are There is no gender, there is no social status, there's no religion, there's no language, there's no barriers, there's no limits. We are all here sharing the same experience because we are alive. And I think clowning touches very deep in humanity, or at least that's what I try to do, is create a mirror to people, for people to see themselves. And that is very powerful.
That's so beautiful. That is very powerful. Seeing ourselves. When, yeah, when you've been, when people like you, your ancestors, your forerunners have been made invisible, to make them visible is quite a powerful thing. It might seem a small thing to many, but it is quite a powerful thing. When you're able to tell the story and have that story listened to, it's enormously powerful. I mean, what is the, Freud's talking cure, but somebody telling their personal story, and there's healing in that, and there's power in that healing. And it's a simple act of going, this happened to me, or this happened to my people, I'm telling you about it now. And in that small act, which is the purity of theatre, as Peter Brook would say, theatre is one person walking across the stage and another person sitting and observing that. That's a very powerful moment. You've listened to me, and I've become empowered by your act of listening. And that's, I guess, what we're all doing.
Before we take the next question, I just want to make sure that I say that you can see Sancho and me for one night only in the Wist Theater. You can see perhaps Quizás with Gabby in the Helen Theater. And then you can see Indigenous Enterprise right here on US Bank Plaza for free throughout the festival. Please, we'd love to get your next question.
All right, this is Luke. And you can see that I am a person having opportunities to be into a token roles, not even as professional performing artist. So I would like you to talk about something the opposite than what you already have mentioned. We want to know the funniest unintended situation when you could make your stereotype or token whatever status into your performance and maybe even promote social justice.
Wow, that's unexpectedly funny.
So the list is funny, empowerment, and intended
Dude, that's a tough
promotion.
one.
Maybe.
Well, that's the best question I've ever been asked, because I have no answer for you. That's such a good, I mean, I suppose you can get yourself into situations where people are surprised by you. Their expectation is low, I suppose, and you can surprise them. But I can't think of, off the top of my head, a situation that was
performance realm. I've had some situations that were funny just on a personal level. I live in Akron, Ohio, which if you are not from this area, it's about 45 minutes away from here. And there is a woman who is also in the kind of public realm and community. And we don't look anything alike. But I think that because they're this tokenism you're talking about, we are mistaken for each other regularly. And this person, very kind, came up to me and was like, I saw that you were in Michigan and it was great. And she was like and she had obviously been watching this person's story or something. And I went, it was amazing. And then I left. And I told this woman, because I know her, I said, I'm going to start pretending to be you so I can get out of conversations. That is going to be my new superpower. So it's not about, it's not about me performing necessarily, but those types of situations, because although I am speaking to you, I am not necessarily a person who covets attention. And so any opportunity to duck, I will take. We do have another question from the audience.
For Patterson Joseph, you your character in Peep Show has such an interesting voice and just manner of speaking. What goes into developing something like that?
Okay, thank you for your question. Can I just first of all say, it's not adult entertainment. I know you're all thinking it. Peep Show is a comedy, a British comedy, and it's very hard to sort of express it. But it's a comedy about a couple of losers who live in an apartment together, and everybody, as they interact with the character, is looking down the camera lens. So it's a very strange. And I play a horrible boss, a guy called Alan Johnson, and he's mean, and he has no redeeming qualities whatsoever, and he's hugely popular. It's very compromising to be representing a character who you absolutely despise, and yet generations, usually of students, love him. I can only say that Jesse Armstrong, who co-wrote Peep Show, also wrote Succession, has a very wicked sense of humor. Both of them did, and I once asked them, "Is anybody as extreme as this? Is this a real person?" And they said, "Yes, we have friends who work in the city in London, and their bosses often," and I can't swear because we're in the public, "come out on a Friday and basically scream at their drones, as they call them, to work harder and abuse them and then shut their office door." So I thought, well, the character's quite mild compared to that. But thank you for that. The first time I came to Ohio, it was to Columbus. And we were performing, the Royal Shakespeare Company were performing Julius Caesar there. And I came out of a supermarket, and someone stopped me. It's in 2013, and went, "Are you Alan Johnson?" And I went, "Yeah, I play Alan Johnson." He said, what are you doing here?" And it was like I was an alien had landed from nowhere. But that was the first time I was recognized in America. So I'm very happy about Peep Show, even though he's a horrible character. Thank you for the question.
That's such a great show, by the way.
Oh, okay.
I love it.
I like playing characters that are not my personality in any way. It really does give me the opportunity to do things I would never do. I played a role where I jumped on a table and I basically tap danced on donuts and poured milk on them and then kicked them off the table. It was not acceptable in a normal case, but I had a great time doing it.
Do you know, there's a thing we used to do when we were at theatre school, drama school. We did clown work. And one thing we learned about clown work was that no matter how strange that clown might have been, dangerous, rude, it wasn't us. So it was like you were able to put somebody else in front of you and go, do all these things, but it wasn't me. You take the red nose off and that's it. No responsibility. Do you find that, Gail? Do you find that?
No.
Okay.
I actually encourage people not to do that.
I was taught very badly, sorry.
We have another question for the audience.
This is a text question. What's your take on race swapping in movies and stories? Is it okay to have people of color play historically white characters? Is it okay for white characters to play historically black characters? Or should we focus on creating new and original stories for people of all backgrounds?
I would say so.
The last one.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, there's plenty of
See.
stories. There's plenty of stories out there that we don't need to do any of that stuff with. But can I just say this? The reason that you have, I often play characters that are non-ethnically specific. I mean, if it's historical, I have much more trouble with that, seeing that, than if it's just this made-up story. I mean, sometimes people might complain about Doctor Who, this fictional Time Lord, and say, "Oh, you got a black person playing Doctor Who." So, yeah, he's made up. If a character's being made up, then you can put anybody in that role. If it's an historical character, unless you're doing something about George Washington that you want to say, then have a white person play George Washington. We have gazillion stories to be told for black and brown people that have never been told. That's why it's such a rich field. So let's tell those stories first. One proviso is, for years, black and brown actors have been shut out of roles because people have said, historically speaking, you wouldn't be there, so we can't have you there. And often that's just ignorance. Either our ignorance of our own history or the ignorance of the producer-director. So in those cases, sometimes what we would consider incongruity is just now historical fact that's come to light. So I would say we can balance that. If it's a very famous historical character, I would say let the person who would look like that play that character. On stage, I would say that is even, I think I'm even less concerned with who's playing what character, as long as that person is convincing in that role. It's when somebody isn't fitted for a role and is playing that role and no thought has gone into it except, well, we need a brown person in that role. That's when I tend to get upset.
Unless it's a clown show.
If it's a clown show, anything goes.
Exactly. Basically, I've played a suffragette. I mean, yeah, and everything's possible.
Did you want to add it on? You don't have to. I was just, you were thinking, and I was like, I wanted to give you the opportunity in case you did want to talk.
No, but I agree with everything they just said. It was beautiful.
Fantastic.
This is another text question. Powwow was deeply rooted in centuries of culture and tradition, but there is also a very modern aspect to it. Regalia trends change, and even jingle dress has more modern version of dance. As a Native woman, I'm often finding ways to maintain modernity, but find pushback by non-natives who have an expectation of what natives are supposed to act and look like. Can you talk about the ways Indigenous enterprise pushes the narrative on what it's like to be both a traditional but also modern people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with our company, we're kind of coming at it like as the newer generation. So I started the company when I was like 19 years old, and Dom and everybody and Maya, we're all like in the millennial generation. So before it was kind of more of like you would see Indigenous Native American dance troops, and it was kind of like the old, oh, the buffalo roamed, and it was like very like, you know, old Buffalo Bill type shows, where it was kind of more of like you would have an elder be speaking with like some like flute music playing in the background, and then they're just telling you some stories of like long time ago, and then like, you know, we wanted to kind of do something different with Indigenous enterprise, so I wanted to kind of like bring a more younger energy to it. So I always like kind of tell the audience like, hey, how's everybody doing? You know, make some noise over there. Like kind of like I've gone to a lot of like, you know, concerts growing up, and I got really, really inspired by just like seeing how live performers, and we wanted to bring that energy to Native American dancing and kind of make them a little bit more modern. And then with the show, I don't have any visuals right here, but I went forward and created some like animation. So I'm a filmmaker, so I went and hired some animators to kind of go ahead and create the actual origin stories of our dancing to make it more palatable for people and kind of like diluting a message. So it really, really kind of brings it a little bit more modern. And then even just like the collaborations that we do, like I'm wearing a shoe right now with Nike SB. And so we were in a commercial with Nike SB, and that was like the first time you ever seen Native American dancers within a modern spectrum, but showcasing Indigenous culture and representing our people and bringing it into spectrums that you would never see us before. And we kind of wanted to do it in a more of a younger millennial generation. And so kind of like we want to be able to encourage people our age and the younger generation to be proud of their heritage, but to also kind of be able to do it from a younger people's perspective and kind of being able to uplift the culture within like from our take. So that's kind of like how our company does it. Yeah, we wanted to kind of be able to bring it up without having the old, you know, how can I say it? Without it being boring, if that makes any sense. We wanted to kind of make it a little bit youthful and uplifting and kind of more of upbeat. So you guys will see a little bit of it if you guys come tonight.
Thank you for that. And just to add to that, I would say if a person is not a part of a group and they give you pushback, don't move. Just continue to do what you're doing. I am going to give us our closing remarks. I want to say thank you to Patterson, Gabby, and Kenneth for joining us at the City Club today. I really appreciate having you. Yes, please. They have been traveling and rehearsing, and they have made it here, so they deserve your round of applause. The City Club's Outdoor Summer Series is presented by Thompson Heinen, with additional support from Cliffs. Today's forum is also part of the City Club in the Community Series sponsored by Bank of America. Next Wednesday, the City Club will be back under the chandelier talking with experts from the Lincoln Institute on the role of institutional and out-of-state investors on housing affordability. Then on August 7th, we'll hear from Jeremy Umansky, James James Beard Award-nominated chef and author on the benefits of sustainable food sourcing. You can learn about each of these forums and what's next in the free outdoor summer series at cityclub.org. Thank you once again to our speakers, and thank you members and friends of the City Club. I am Josie Jones, and this forum is now adjourned.
Sure.